I spent my entire $110,000 divorce settlement to buy a 49% share of my son's organic mushroom farm because he was my only child, and I believed in the calluses on his hands from working the grow tunnels for years. Then 3 days after we inked a $1.3 million contract with a national grocery chain, I found a small fireproof box my late mother had hidden in her linen closet, and under a stack of recipe cards was a note in her shaky handwriting that said, "Claudia, the amendment is a forgery, he is stealing from you, I already checked. Now I run Mall of the Story Mushrooms, my son works as my field hand wearing a shirt that says My Spores Are Real, and I supply that same grocery chain with co-branded Lion's Mane tinctures that outsell his original fresh mushrooms 2 to 1. This is exactly how it happened. My name is Claudia Voss, and for 27 years I was the assistant bookkeeper at Meridian Air Systems, a mid-sized HVAC contractor in Poughkeepsie. My entire job was reconciling 500 vendor invoices a month against payment runs and flagging discrepancies. I could spot a 13-cent mismatch in a stack of accounts payable 3 inches thick without a calculator, and I knew every account in the general ledger by the frequency of its transaction codes. That skill set, and the fact that my father was a locksmith who put a tension wrench in my hand at age 10, saved my life in ways I never could have predicted. My husband Gary, a regional sales manager who spent 20 years missing quota, decided his 42-year-old dental hygienist was more exciting than our 30-year marriage, and I walked away with a check for $110,000 after both attorneys finished picking the carcass clean. Every sensible woman my age would have bought a condo in a 55-plus community with a pickleball court and a view of the desert, but I put the entire sum plus every penny of my own savings into my son Marcus's dream. Marcus had been fascinated by mycology since he was 16, when he grew a pink oyster mushroom kit on the windowsill and stayed up all night watching the pinheads form. He spent his 20s working on small specialty farms in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania and the Hudson Valley, learning sterile culture technique, agar transfer, grain spawn production, and the exact CO2 and humidity parameters for king trumpet, chestnut and lion's mane varieties. Eventually he found a foreclosed 12-acre property near a cord with 2 2,400-square-foot climate-controlled grow tunnels, a well that tested at 7.2 pH with no heavy metals, a pasteurization room with a used diesel-fired steam generator, and a dilapidated farmhouse that needed a new roof and foundation work. The seller demanded 40% cash down. Marcus had maybe $6,000 in a checking account and a credit card maxed out buying liquid culture syringes from a supplier in Oregon, so I became his business partner in full. We hired a real business attorney in Kingston to draft the partnership agreement, not some online template, and I combed through every clause with the same forensic patience I had used to spot dummy vendor accounts at the HVAC company. The final document gave Marcus 51% of the membership interest to my 49%, and it stipulated in Section 7.3 that any amendment to the ownership structure, any dilution, any buyout clause, required the signatures of both partners notarized in person with 2 forms of identification. I still have the original, with the raised notary seal and the blue ink signatures that I verified under a magnifying lamp at the closing table. I thought I was being relentlessly careful. My mother Ilara was 78 and lived alone in a small bungalow on a hill road outside New Paltz. She had been a notary public for 30 years before she retired and spent her final decade gardening, keeping bees, and auditing the county tax assessor's public filings for entertainment. She was the quiet architect of my backbone, the one person who never once hinted that I was foolish for trusting my son with my entire financial future. She told me repeatedly, "Trust your ledger, not your family's promises." She had a saying, "A signature is a fingerprint made of intent." I should have listened harder, memorized it, carved it into the wall above my bed. She died 6 months after the big contract came through, a ruptured brain aneurysm while she was pruning her clematis trellis on a sunny Tuesday afternoon. The coroner said she likely never registered pain, just a sudden occlusion and then nothing. That was the only mercy in this entire story, because what happened next systematically shredded every decent memory I had of my son and left me with a cold, permanent fury. Within 8 hours of the memorial service, Marcus and his wife Lana descended on my mother's bungalow like estate liquidators working on commission. Lana wore a dove-grey pantsuit with a silk scarf and kept using phrases like honoring her legacy and curating the meaningful pieces, while her manicured hands flipped my mother's crystal paperweights onto a sorting table with price stickers from a label maker. Marcus stood in the corner of the kitchen, refreshing his phone for updates on a substrate shipment, muttering about whether the rise he logs in Tunnel 2 were stalling due to a humidity controller malfunction. Neither of them shed a single tear at the service, not during the eulogy I gave, not when the rabbi read the 23rd Psalm. I was so hollowed out from the loss that I didn't even argue when they began pulling my mother's possessions off shelves and assigning them to keep, donate, or dump bins. Marcus wandered into the narrow linen closet off the upstairs hallway and found a small grey Sentry fireproof safe with a combination dial, the same model my mother had used since the mid-1980s to store her tax records and jewellery. He shook it, heard a muffled papery thump, and said something casual and dismissive, probably just Grandma's old recipe cards and that costume jewellery she bought at church rummage sales. He dropped it onto a pile destined for the Goodwill truck without a second glance. Lana didn't even look up from her pricing gun. I waited until they both left that evening, then I retrieved the safe and carried it to my car. That night I sat on the edge of my hotel bed in Kingston, the cheap polyester spread bunching under my knees, and I dialed my mother's wedding anniversary, November 14th, 1963, right, left, right, and the bolt slid back with a heavy clank. Inside was exactly what Marcus had dismissed, a stack of yellowed index cards in my mother's loopy cursive, recipes for brown soda bread, rhubarb compote, and a wild mushroom barley soup she used to make every autumn. Underneath that stack, pressed flat against the steel bottom, was a thick manila envelope sealed with packaging tape and labelled in her hand, "To Claudia, personal and privileged, do not open in front of anyone." I slit the tape with a fingernail and pulled out 3 items. The first was a letter on her personal notepad, handwritten and dated 13 days before her aneurysm. The second was a photocopy of a partnership amendment dated approximately 4 months earlier, right around the time the grocery chain had sent their letter of intent. The third was a certified forensic handwriting examiner's report from a qualified document analyst in Albany, complete with a CV and ANAB accreditation number. My hands began to tremble in a way I had not experienced since my divorce, a deep physiological tremor that started in my wrists and climbed to my shoulders. I smoothed the letter against my thigh and read it twice out loud to the empty room. "Claudia, I went to the Ulster County Clerk's office to check the farm deed on a hunch because Marcus asked me to co-sign a line of credit, and the terms he described didn't match the original ownership structure you showed me. Something felt sour, like milk left on the counter. I found a filed amendment to your partnership agreement, allegedly signed by you, that extinguishes your 49% membership interest and converts it to a flat $10,000 buyout plus a permanent ban from the property. Your supposed signature is on page 3. It is not yours. I recognized the slant discrepancies immediately. I took the filed document to an examiner in Albany, paid him out of my own account, and his full report is enclosed. 17 separate deviations from your known signature specimens. Do not trust Marcus. Do not sign anything. Save yourself." Underneath, in smaller letters, "I have taken one further step. I cannot explain it here, but if I am gone before this is resolved, call the credit union and ask for Teresa Park. She knows the file. I love you." I flattened the photocopy of the amendment against the bedspread and studied every line. It was a 2-page document, professionally typed, with a notary stamp from a mobile notary service in New Paltz and a signature that superficially resembled my own, but I had signed my name on payroll checks for decades, on deposit slips, on the original partnership agreement that now felt like a liability. The differences were immediately obvious to my eye. The capital C in Claudia was formed with a leftward slant in the forgery, while my natural cursive always carries the C forward and slightly upward. The loop on my lowercase o is tight and ovoid, almost rushed, whereas the forgery had a larger, rounder loop with a trailing exit stroke that I never produce. The pen pressure was uniform, a consistent thickness that indicates either a light Barks trace or a very careful freehand imitation, but real signatures have micro-variations in ink flow where the nib accelerates or decelerates. I could see 17 separate specific deviations just with my unaided eye, and the forensic report itemized every single one of them, comparing exemplars from my DMV signature card, my bank signature card, and the original partnership agreement. The examiner concluded with a certainty of no less than 99.7% that the signature was not mine. My mother had even stapled the examiner's business card to the back of the report with a handwritten note, "He will testify if needed." I sat on that hotel bed until 3 in the morning, staring at the cheap art print on the wall, my mother's letter pressed to my chest. I did not cry. The grief had frozen into something harder, a structured mineral rage that I recognized from the deepest part of my bookkeeping brain, the part that would sit for 14 hours straight until a $40,000 discrepancy resolved. I was going to need that part. I was going to need every single skill I had accumulated in my invisible, undervalued life, and I was going to burn my son's scheme to the ground with procedural precision. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a parent's sacrifice should never be repaid with fraud. Now back to what happened next. I did not call Marcus that night and scream. I did not drive to his house and bang on the door. I had learned from chasing procurement fraud at the HVAC company that you never confront a subject with partial evidence because they will destroy the rest and bury you under a countersuit for defamation. You build a mountain of documentation first, you verify secondary sources, and you wait until the trap is fully loaded. So over the next week I played the part of a foggy, broken mother who had been hollowed out by grief and could barely remember to feed herself. I shuffled when I walked, I let my hair hang unwashed, I squinted at documents without my reading glasses, and I answered direct questions with vague, slightly off-topic responses that made me seem cognitively disorganized. Marcus and Lana leaned into the performance with an eagerness that made my stomach clench. They drove me to their harsh modern farmhouse, a glass and steel rectangle that sat in the field like a shipping container dropped from a helicopter, and told me I needed to stay in the guest suite above the detached garage so they could take care of me. Lana squeezed my shoulder with her cold fingers and said, "We just want you close, honey, no more stress, no more decisions you have to make alone." What she actually meant was, "We want you under 24-hour surveillance so you don't wander into a lawyer's office or a bank and start asking questions." The guest suite was a converted apartment above a 3-car garage, separated from the main house by a breezeway. It had its own door code, which Lana helpfully programmed for me, explaining that it was for my safety so I didn't get confused and wander outside at night. I recognized the code as Marcus's birthday, 1029, and I memorized the override sequence for the lock's internal programming within the first afternoon. The suite was comfortable but suspiciously sparse. No landline, a weak Wi-Fi signal that dropped constantly, and a window that overlooked the farm's main gate, which was now equipped with a new automatic opener that required a fob I was not given. They could monitor every vehicle that arrived and control who came in contact with me. I took note of all of it, filed it in a mental spreadsheet, and continued to act confused. Within 3 days they produced the first batch of documents, spread across the kitchen island like place settings at a banquet. A voluntary release of partnership interest, drafted in dense legal language, that would formalize my buyout at exactly $10,000, matching the amount in the forged amendment. A permanent waiver of all future claims, all causes of action, and any right to inspect the farm's books. A medical power of attorney that Lana claimed was just routine. "In case you have a spell, sweetie, we just want to be able to help." Marcus slid a pen across the granite and smiled his salesman's smile, the same smile he had used to pitch me on the farm 2 years earlier. "Mom, listen, I know this all feels sudden, but the grocery chain's procurement team needs a clean cap table to finalize the supply agreement. They are doing a compliance audit. This just cleans up the loose end. And honestly, 10 grand gives you some walking around money while you figure out your next step. A little condo, maybe." I squinted at the pages, let the paper tremble visibly in my hands, and said in a distant, bewildered tone, "I can barely see straight, honey, the letters are swimming. Can we talk about this after I get my new glasses prescription? I have an appointment next month." Then I tucked the unsigned paperwork into my oversized purse and shuffled back to the guest suite, where I immediately locked the door, photographed every page, and emailed the images to a new secure cloud account I had set up from a library computer in Kingston. For 3 solid weeks I maintained the act. I asked Lana the same question 17 times in one afternoon, deliberately circling back to how the disposal works or what day the trash pickup is, until she visibly flinched and her eye twitched when I walked into a room. I called her the document lady with a sweet, blank smile, and she could not figure out whether I was mocking her or genuinely losing my mind. I wore mismatched cardigans, left a single slipper in the mudroom once, and stood in the greenhouse for a full hour staring at the oyster mushrooms as if I had forgotten why I was there. Marcus and Lana exchanged glances, the kind of relieved conspiratorial looks that said, "She's declining fast, this will be easy." They stopped censoring their conversations around me because they assumed I was too addled to process meaning. That was my greatest tactical advantage. The real investigation began in earnest the weekend they flew to Portland for a specialty mushroom expo, leaving me alone on the property for 62 hours. I had catalogued every financial red flag I had overhead from my position in the corner of the living room, pretending to doze in an armchair. Marcus made frantic, hissed phone calls from the mudroom, pacing in his socks, arguing with someone about a factoring company that was refusing to advance any more invoices because the farm's receivables were already pledged against a previous advance. He used phrases like balloon payment, 30-day default, and equipment seizure in a tone of raw panic. Lana, meanwhile, kept a brand-new Cadillac Escalade with temporary Virginia plates parked in the driveway, the kind of vehicle that leases at $1,200 a month with top-tier credit, and she had left a credit card statement on the kitchen counter that showed a recent $5,400 charge at the Louis Vuitton store in the shops at Columbus Circle. A mushroom farm with one wholesale contract and no year of profitability does not generate that kind of disposable cash flow. I knew because during my preliminary diligence, before I invested, I had built a pro forma spreadsheet that modeled their projected revenue based on the published volume commitments in the grocery chain's letter of intent, factoring in standard wholesale pricing for Grey Dove oyster at $12 per pound and King Trumpet at $18 per pound, minus the costs of wheat bran supplementation, polypropylene fruiting bags, propane for the steam pasteurizer, and labor. The net margin, even under optimistic assumptions, was about 17%. That meant their entire annual operating surplus, after all expenses and debt service, might reach $220,000 in a banner year. Lana had spent more than a full quarter of that on handbags. The math was screaming at me. The household accident that gave me a tactical advantage occurred on a Tuesday morning after they returned. The incinerator disposal unit in the main kitchen sink seized up with a horrible metallic grinding noise, and water immediately began backing up into the basin. Lana, who has never fixed anything in her life, started frantically pressing the red reset button on the bottom of the unit with the handle of a wooden spoon, which only caused the thermal overload to cycle uselessly. Marcus tried to jam a butter knife into the drain opening to force the flywheel, and he succeeded only in stripping the center bolt thread until the knife spun freely. I watched from the breakfast nook for a full minute, then stood up, walked to the garage where I had noticed a pegboard of basic tools, selected a 4mm hex wrench, and returned to the sink. I inserted the wrench into the manual crank socket accessible from the bottom center of the disposal housing, applied steady counterclockwise pressure, and rotated the flywheel 3 full turns until I felt the obstruction, a chicken bone that someone had dropped into the drain, grind free and drop into the canister. Then I pressed the reset button once, and the unit hummed back to life. The whole repair took 90 seconds. Lana stared at me with her mouth open. How does a retired bookkeeper know how to unjam a disposal? She asked, her voice carrying a thin, suspicious edge. I shrugged and said mildly, I grew up fixing things. My father was a locksmith, and he taught me that the simplest mechanical problems just need patience, not panic. That was my first deliberate slip from the demented widow act, a tiny flex of competence, and it reminded me viscerally that while they could not even unjam a sink, I possessed a deep reservoir of hands-on skills that they had no idea about. Skills that were about to prove decisive. The locked filing cabinet in Marcus's home office became my central target. It was a 2-drawer steel Hahn cabinet, battleship grey, with a simple wafer lock on the top drawer. I had noticed it during my initial tour because the key was not kept in the desk drawer. Marcus wore it on a lanyard around his neck whenever he was home. My father had taught me to pick wafer locks when I was 14, sitting at his workbench in the basement of our old house, with a South-Ord PXS-14 pocket set and a series of progressively more difficult practice plugs. He had said in his patient, methodical voice that a wafer lock is just a series of flat spring-loaded tumblers, and if you apply light rotational pressure and rake across them with a diamond pick, the wafers will bind at the shear line one by one until the plug turns. He made me practice blindfolded until I could open a 4-wafer cabinet lock in under 20 seconds without scratching the faceplate. I still had that exact South-Ord set, a compact leather case I had kept in my luggage for decades more as a sentimental artifact than a planned tool of espionage. Now it felt like an inheritance. The next time Marcus left the house for the compost supplier, a trip that I knew took at least 90 minutes, I let myself into his office. I moved a stack of seed catalogues away from the cabinet, knelt on the low-pile carpet, and removed the tension wrench and diamond pick from the case. I inserted the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applied light clockwise torque with my index finger, just enough to feel the wafers start to bind, and then I raked the pick across the wafer stack with a steady, sweeping motion, back and forth 4 times, feeling the spring resistance diminish with each pass. On the 5th rake, the plug rotated a fraction of an inch, and the shear line cleared with a soft, satisfying click that took me instantly back to my father's basement. The drawer slid open on quiet runners, and I was inside. The top folder, hung on a Pendaflex rail and labeled in Marcus's block capitals, was titled Amendment Executed Final. It contained the original notarized forgery, the same document my mother had photocopied at the county clerk's office, with the raised seal I now recognized as belonging to a mobile notary service that operated out of a strip mall in New Paltz. The notary's logbook, which I would later obtain through a court order, showed that the amendment was stamped on a date when I was verifiably at a doctor's appointment in Poughkeepsie, 50 miles away, and my signature was not witnessed. Behind that were the business bank statements from a regional credit union in Kingston, the same credit union where Marcus had opened both the farm operating account and a shadow personal checking account. The statements showed systematic monthly transfers ranging from $18,000 to $26,000, coded as management fee or owner draw M. VOS, from the partnership operating account into that personal checking account. Over a 9-month period, he had siphoned $412,740, leaving the business account with a running balance that rarely cleared $800 by the end of any given statement cycle. There was also a promissory note from a hard money lender called Hudson Valley Asset-Based Capital, secured by both the farm's pasteurization equipment and the HVAC systems in the grow tunnels, with my name forged as a personal co-guarantor on the signature page. If that note defaulted, the lender could not only seize the physical infrastructure and sell it at auction, but they could also sue me personally for the deficiency balance, which the note pegged at $270,000 principal plus 18% annual default interest. He was not just trying to steal my stake, he was setting me up as the credit-worthy scapegoat for his entire debt spiral. I photographed every page methodically, holding my phone steady to ensure the account numbers, routing numbers, and signature lines were fully legible. I then replaced everything in the exact original order, aligning the paper edges with the folder seam so no displacement was visible. I closed the drawer, relocked it by rotating the plug back with the tension wrench, and walked to the guest suite on legs that felt hollow. For the next hour I sat on the bed and simply catalogued the evidence in a fresh notebook, using the same double-entry method I had learned from my mother when she showed me how to balance a checkbook. The rage was still there, but it had cooled into something almost meditative, a meticulous, spreadsheet-driven fury that would not rest until every column balanced and every liability was traced to its origin. The ally I needed was already in place, waiting like a piece my mother had slid across the chessboard years before I understood we were playing. Inside the manila envelope from the safe, along with the letter and the forensic report, my mother had included a crisp business card from Teresa Park, Senior Compliance Officer at Hudson Valley Community Credit Union, the same institution where Marcus held his business account. The card had a direct line phone number written on the back. My mother had visited Teresa 4 months earlier, before the forgery was even filed, because Marcus had attempted to open a joint credit line that required my mother's co-signature. And during the application process, Teresa's internal document verification flagged the ownership amendment as inconsistent with the original partnership agreement on file. My mother had been the one to walk into the county clerk's office and pull the amendment, and she had then hand-delivered the photocopy to Teresa, who initiated a suspicious activity review under FinCEN regulations. Teresa could not disclose private account information without a warrant, but she could maintain a file and watch the transaction patterns. And she had. I called Teresa from a prepaid burner phone I bought at a truck stop gas station outside New Paltz, paying cash for the phone and the minutes card so there would be no record tied to my name. When she answered, I identified myself and gave the reference my mother's letter had provided. Her tone shifted immediately from professional neutral to something focused and deliberate. "MS. Voss, I've been waiting for your call. Your mother was remarkably thorough, and I want to walk you through exactly what she put in place. Are you in a safe location?" I assured her I was, and for the next 40 minutes she described the full architecture of my mother's countermeasure. 3 years earlier, when Marcus needed earnest money to secure the land before my divorce settlement finalized, my mother had quietly lent him $20,000 from her own savings, structured with a promissory note drafted by her estate attorney. That note included a clause that if she died before the loan was satisfied, the lien against the farm's real property would not simply dissolve. It would transfer to me personally as her sole heir, and it could not be discharged or subordinated without my notarized signature and physical presence at the credit union where the original loan was originated. In effect, my mother had placed a deadman's switch on the farm's title. Any sale, any refinance, any attempt to access the equity would hit a hard wall that required my active cooperation. Furthermore, the original partnership agreement, the true one with my 49% stake, was not just in my personal file. My mother had placed a notarized copy in a joint safe deposit box at a different community bank 40 minutes away, a box that required both Marcus and me to be physically present with valid identification for any access. If either party attempted to alter the ownership records, the bank required a medallion signature guarantee from all stakeholders, a process that would immediately reveal the forgery. She had built a maze that could only be solved by both of us standing in the same room, voluntarily, and the moment I refused to cooperate, the trap was sprung. Teresa continued, "We placed a soft freeze on the partnership accounts 4 months ago based on the signature mismatch your mother flagged. The grocery chain's supplier compliance team has also been notified, because we share suspicious activity reports with their procurement finance division when a vendor's ownership structure is contested. They've been holding the final contract execution pending resolution of the ownership dispute. Right now, that contract is in a state of technical default. If you do not sign the release your son is pushing, the grocery chain pulls the contract entirely in about 10 days and claws back the advance payments. If you do sign, you lose everything and he can still lose the contract anyway because your signature was forged, and the original issue remains unresolved on their audit. You have leverage either way, but if you want him to face consequences beyond just the contract collapse, you need to refuse to cooperate and then let the legal process take over. We have everything ready. I just need you to say the word." I said the word, and then I asked for one more thing, a warrant to seize the physical evidence from his office, timed to a moment when he would be forced into a public confrontation. Teresa said she would coordinate with the Ulster County Sheriff's Department's Financial Crimes Unit and the grocery chain's Legal Risk Division. The maximum cruelty beat. The moment I truly understood there was no salvageable relationship on the other side of this happened on a cold, damp Thursday morning in early November. I had spent the previous night reviewing every piece of evidence and rehearsing my confrontation script. I decided to test whether my son retained even a molecule of the boy I had raised, the one who used to bring me dandelions in a juice glass and cry when his goldfish died. I staged a medical collapse. While Lana was in the laundry room folding towels and Marcus was pacing in the kitchen on a phone call, his voice raised about a missed equipment lease payment, I slid sideways off a low stool in the breakfast nook. I let my body drop onto the tile floor with a hard, jarring impact that I knew would bruise my hip, and I clutched my chest with one hand, letting the other fall limp across the cold ceramic. I closed my eyes to slits and waited. Lana walked into the room holding a stack of pristine white guest towels. She saw me on the floor, my body splayed across the tile, my breathing shallow and deliberately uneven. She did not pause. She did not check my airway or my pulse. She took one step over my outstretched leg, her loafer brushing my ankle, and she reached across the island counter to grab the leather portfolio that contained the unsigned release documents I had been dodging for 3 weeks. She tucked it under her arm and walked back toward the laundry room as if stepping over a dropped bath mat. Marcus came into the kitchen 30 seconds later, still on the phone, and his eyes flicked down to my motionless body. His first words, directed at Lana but loud enough for me to hear with perfect clarity, were, "Did she sign it yet? Is the release signed?" Then he gently nudged my shoe with the toe of his work boot, the way you might nudge a possum on the side of the road to see if it was still a problem. He did not kneel. He did not call 911. He did not say my name. I lay there for another full 2 minutes until they retreated to the far end of the house, and then I stood up, brushed off my slacks, and walked to my suite with the cold, clean rage that replaced every warm memory of my son. That was the point of no return. There was no motherly instinct remaining, only the procedural machinery of accountability. The confrontation came 4 days later, orchestrated with the precision of a tax audit. The grocery chain's procurement director sent a certified letter to the farm's registered business address, giving 72 hours to remedy the ownership dispute, or the supply agreement would be terminated, and all advance payments against future deliveries would be clawed back. Marcus received the letter at 9:15 a.m., and within 20 minutes he was banging on the door of my guest suite, his face pale and slick with sweat. Lana was behind him, clutching the portfolio and a brand new notary stamp she had purchased online from an office supply website, still in its plastic packaging. "Mom, we have to go to the bank right now," he said, his voice cracking in a way that would have broken my heart 3 months earlier. "We have to open Grandma's safe deposit box and get the original partnership agreement. The credit union says there's some old lien on the title from her, some paperwork glitch, and the grocery chain is going to walk. You just need to sign a simple release so I can access the document. One signature, that's all. It's all Grandma's confusion with her estate. Please, Mom, I'm begging you." I looked at my son, the man who had forged my signature on 17 separate deviations, drained $412,000 into a personal account, and stepped over my body to grab a file folder. I straightened my spine to its full height, felt the vertebrae click into alignment, and I said quite clearly, "The only thing I'm signing today is your termination notice from this partnership." The color drained from his face in a slow, uneven mottling, starting at his temples and spreading downward. Before he could form a response, the front door of the main house swung open and 3 people walked in without knocking. Teresa Park was in the lead, holding a binder with the credit union's investigative file. Behind her were a uniformed deputy from the Ulster County Sheriff's Department, carrying a portfolio of criminal summonses and a search warrant for the farm office, and a senior attorney from the grocery chain's Legal Risk Division, who had driven up from their headquarters in Montvale. The deputy served Marcus with criminal summonses for forgery in the 2nd degree, a Class D felony under New York penal law, grand larceny by embezzlement, and identity theft for signing my name to the loan guarantee documents. The attorney served a civil notice of breach and immediate suspension of the supply contract, with a rider that the contract would be reassigned to a new entity controlled by me if the ownership question was resolved in my favor within 90 days. Teresa produced the original Deadman's letter from my mother, the lien document, and a court order from an Ulster County judge that activated the soft freeze into a full asset preservation order, freezing every bank account tied to the partnership and the personal accounts that had received the diverted funds. Marcus stood in the kitchen with the summons papers trembling in his hand and opened his mouth to say something, perhaps a denial or a plea, but no sound came out. Lana looked at the deputy, then at the frozen credit card statements I had photographed, then at the Louis Vuitton bag sitting on the kitchen island, and she began to cry in a way that conveyed only self-pity, not remorse. Within 90 minutes, a court-appointed receiver walked the grow tunnels and the pasteurization room, cataloguing every bag of sterilized substrate, every liquid culture jar, and every pound of fruiting mushrooms as partnership assets. The mobile notary who had stamped the forged amendment was later identified as an acquaintance of Lana's from a real estate closing mill, and her notary commission was suspended pending a formal investigation. The aftermath was not a melodramatic explosion with shouted accusations and slammed doors. It was quiet, procedural, and utterly devastating to the people who had tried to destroy me. Marcus's business attorney resigned within 48 hours after reviewing the evidence binder, sending a terse letter that cited irreconcilable conflicts and a duty of candor to the court. The criminal case went to a grand jury, and Marcus accepted a plea deal that included 5 years of felony probation, 500 hours of community service, the permanent surrender of his passport, and full restitution of the $412,740 diverted to personal accounts, plus the $270,000 deficiency on the hard money loan that my forged guarantee had enabled. The restitution order was secured by a wage garnishment and a lien on any future assets he might acquire, which meant his economic future was essentially foreclosed. Lana filed for divorce within 2 weeks, moved to her sister's house in Scottsdale, and took the Escalade because it was leased in her name only, but she left behind the handbags and the jewelry because the asset freeze order covered all personal property purchased with partnership funds. The hard money lender initially attempted to seize the pasteurization equipment and HVAC systems, but because my name was proven forged on the guarantee, the lender's claim against me was voided by summary judgment, and they settled with the farm's new ownership structure, meaning me, for approximately 12 cents on the dollar. The grocery chain, impressed by my mother's countermeasure and my refusal to be steamrolled, offered a direct co-branding arrangement that was more lucrative than the original supply contract. I hired a talented graphic designer from a studio in Beacon to rebuild the visual brand around a single, resonant image: my mother's recipe card for wild mushroom soup, the one she had written in loopy cursive on a yellow index card inside that Sentry safe, transformed into a logo with a spore print motif. The court voided the fraudulent amendment in its entirety and awarded me full ownership of the operating entity in equity, siding Marcus's breach of fiduciary duty and his diversion of partnership funds to personal accounts. Combined with the Deadman's lien that gave me a superior security interest, I now controlled every share of the membership interest, the real property, and the physical assets. I renamed the business mall of the Story Mushrooms, a small joke that my mother would have appreciated, and I retooled one grow tunnel to produce ready-to-fruit grow kits using recycled coffee grounds and hardwood pellets, packaged in colorful boxes with my mother's recipe card design. I developed a line of co-branded products with the grocery chain: double-extracted lion's mane tinctures, dried mushroom crisp snacks with pink salt and rosemary, and a frozen wild mushroom soup that used the exact recipe from my mother's index card, which I licensed from her estate, meaning myself, for a symbolic $1. The original wholesale supply contract was renegotiated with better terms because the exclusive strain patents that Marcus had filed, in his name but under the business entity, were a partnership asset. Those patents covered the genetic isolates for a high-yield lion's mane strain and a fast-fruiting chestnut mushroom that he had developed over years of cloning. Since the patents were part of the entity's intellectual property, they transferred to me in the ownership judgment, so I own the genetics, the branding, the contracts, and the entire value chain from spore to retail shelf. Marcus now faces mandatory restitution payments that exceed anything he can earn through conventional employment, given the felony forgery conviction on his record. As a condition of his probation, the court permitted him to work under my supervision on the farm, with his wages garnished at 75% toward the restitution order. I assigned him to substrate duty, which is the least glamorous role in any mushroom operation. He stands in the pasteurization room for 8 hours a day, wearing a respirator, rubber boots, and heat-resistant gloves, shoveling spent sawdust, soybean hulls, and mycelium runoff into a rotating steam drum that runs at 160 degrees. The room smells of earth, steam, and decay, and he cannot check his phone because the humidity would ruin the screen. His uniform includes a company-issued shirt, a simple heather grey tee with block letters, that I had printed with a phrase he once used in an investor pitch deck years ago, when he was trying to raise money from a venture capital group in New York. My spores are real. It was his tagline, meant to differentiate his starter cultures from competitors who used mixed or contaminated spawn. Now it hangs over his chest while he scoops substrate into an autoclave, and he cannot say a single word about it, because any complaint to his probation officer about workplace conditions would be recorded as a violation of the cooperation clause that keeps him out of county jail. He sees me every morning when I unlock the barn, and I see him, and the only sound is the hum of the steam generator and the wet shoveling of spent substrate. Every morning I walk the grow tunnels, and I remember my mother sitting at her kitchen table with a magnifying lamp and a handwriting sample card, the quiet architect who never stopped protecting her daughter, even from beyond the grave. She taught me the most valuable lesson of my life, a lesson that now hangs in a frame above the pasteurization room door. Integrity is not inherited. It is cultivated like the finest mycelium network, where every microscopic root strand must be tended daily, protected from contamination, and given the right nutrients to fruit. I have grown a whole new root system in the past year, while the man who tried to chop it down shovels dirt for minimum wage and wears my words across his chest. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. If you loved this story, hit like and subscribe for more real justice served cold, and share this with someone who needs to hear that a parent's sacrifice should never be repaid with fraud. I will be back next Wednesday with another story.